my third.
Don't wear gloves on the miter saw. You lose track of where your fingertips are, and I don't want you getting hurt. Number 3, a dual bevel, D-U-A-L-B-E-V-E-L. A dual bevel miter saw can cut angles from either side. That's one of the first differences you're going to see between these two miter saws. That this is a dual bevel, this is not. For 95% of us, it's never going to make a difference. Dual bevel means that this whole head can tip one way, but not the other way. I'm starting to see why Hagelin got 9 out of 13 on his test. What's going to prevent this miter saw from tipping that way?
That guard right there?
This right here, right. See how this one's at an angle? The company, DeWalt, is not going to manufacture a saw that's going to make you cut through the guard. The motor, you see how the motor sticks way out the side here? But on this one, you probably can't see it over there, but it's at a little bit of an angle. This has what's called a worm gear in it that allows us to be able to tip this way, but that worm gear allows the motor to sit at a 45-degree angle, maybe even stronger than a 45-degree angle, so we can tip the saw this way. That's about a $100 upgrade. So a miter saw that has this is automatically $100 more expensive. Again, unless you're hanging big crown molding or big base molding or stair treads or something like that, you're not going to need to have a dual bevel. I have one because once in a while in woods too, on some of those capstone projects, we will have students that need to do that. Number 4, fingers can never come closer than 4 inches to the blade on the compound miter saw. 4 inches. This is the only tool in the shop that has the 4-inch rule. Everything else is what? 3 inches. Very good. The reason being is there's just a few more moving parts here that's hard to account for. Now 4 inches is about where both of the miter saws turn into a circle. You can have your hand all the way up to there. Now the manufacturer actually has you keep your hands further away. The manufacturer has these little hand signs with the no sign through it way out here. They do that because they're covering their own butts. They say that someone may pick this up off the shelf at Home Depot, bring it home, and hurt themselves, and they're going to try to sue us. That person may have never been trained or had anybody show them how to use a miter saw, but since you guys are here, you're learning some of the basic use of miter saw rules. You can keep your fingers a little bit closer. Now, I'm not saying crazy close, but 4 inches away, your hands need to be. And also, if you start cutting your finger, stop. You don't have to finish cutting all the way through. That always blows my mind that when people, I've seen stories of people cutting fingers off on the miter saw, and part of me says, when you started cutting your finger, what made you continue on that cut? So know that if you do start cutting your finger, go ahead and stop. You don't have to go all the way through.
You need a clean cut on the board?
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
Number 5, when you make your cut. So in middle school, when you cut on a miter saw, let's say I need to cut on this line, and this is 5 inches right here. You drew your line probably with a square, right? And then you came up to the miter saw, you lined up your cut, and then you made your cut. Is that about how it went? Okay, that's normal cutting on a miter saw. We stepped it up 1 notch here. But I want to tell you this. Remember that there's kerf. What is kerf? Anybody tell me what kerf is? Kerf is the thickness of the blade. It's the amount of wood that gets turned into sawdust while you're making a cut. We account for 1/8 of an inch. So if I line the blade up on the wrong side of my line, my board could wind up being 1/8 of an inch short. Right? So just make sure that you got the blade on the waist side, the side that you don't care about, so you don't wind up with a board that is too short. On the miter saw here, which is why I think you'll like using this one more, we've got a tape measure glued down to the top of this. So you can take this little carriage. If I want to make a board that's 19 inches long, I put it at 19 inches. I don't have to measure anything at all. I just put my board down, and I know that it's 19 inches from here to here. Or if I want to go to 15 inches. Now I know that I'm 15 inches. My board is going to be 15 inches. So you don't have to mark anything. You don't have to measure anything. You just have to use the stop. And if things go well, if I can sell that dust collector for enough money, I'm going to buy an automatic stop where you just use a computer. It's a little tablet. You punch in 15 inches, this thing goes and moves to 15 inches automatically. That will be here by the time you guys get to Woods 2. I'm not going to promise you that that's going to be here by the time that you're done with this class. So we're trying, but that thing's got to sell. That's the old dust collector. Number 6. This is the biggest difference between the two miter saws. So there's 2 blanks there, but you only need to fill in one. When using a sliding miter saw, this is how you do it. This moves. This has a 6-inch cutting capacity. This has a 12-inch cutting capacity. So because this can move, there's a few more things we've got to pay attention to. In that table saw kickback video that we saw, the guy was very clear about making sure that you don't move your board the same direction that the cutter head is spinning. So if I'm going to make a cut on here, what I need to do, and this is what's written down, you don't have to write any of this down, I need to first pull the saw all the way out, then I turn it on. So this has to get pushed first. I turn it on, bring it down, and push it back. I do not want to do it in the opposite direction. Where I would turn it on, bring it down, and pull it back. Don't do it that way. What happens if you do it that way? You make the cut, you're cutting, and it goes boom like this, and it slams right back at you. I've had it happen to me twice. It's probably not going to hurt you because most of the time you're standing far enough back. Now, I'm getting closer and closer every year. I don't know what happens to getting hit by the saw. But most of the time it's not going to hurt you. It's just going to make you have to change your shorts because you probably got some moisture in there because you thought this saw was coming right back at you. So you got to be careful of that. You always have to turn it on, bring it down, and push it back. Or bring it out, down, and back. Don't do it the opposite way. Moving the opposite direction the blade is spinning is what gives you control. Number 7, never use a saw that has a stuck blade guard. If this thing is stuck up, like in a Dyna student, we do not want to use it. We want this thing to be able to retract and cover up the blade for a lot of reasons. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. We don't want the blade exposed. It's common, if that happens, it's a linkage. You can see it here or here. This one's more inside. It's right inside of here. It probably just needs to get greased with some WD-40 and then we're all good to go. Number 8, always let the motor get up to full speed before plunging the blade into the material being cut. So if I'm back to old-fashioned way of cutting a board, I've got my line. You know, I'm here, I'm lining it up. What some people forget to do is bring the saw back up and then turn it on. Don't start it with the blade touching the board. The blade's not designed to cut when it's going super slow, and it's just going to tear the board instead of cut through the board. So we need to have that blade up to full speed before we make a cut. Number 9, when cutting warped. What do I mean when I say warped? What means? Say it again? Okay. Right.
Curved.
A curve.
Yeah.
So if you guys ever go to Menards and buy a 2x4 or Home Depot or Lowe's, and you look down that 2x4, chances are it's not going to be straight as an arrow. It's going to kind of do this or this. Don't buy them if they're really warped. Now the lumber that we get is dried and dressed, so it's not quite as bad as a piece of wood from Lowe's, Menards, or Home Depot. But every once in a while, we'll get one that's got a little bend to it. So if your board, let's pretend this is bent like a banana. I hope that you don't come across a board that's bent like a banana. But if it is, and you put it on here, just this side and this side are touching. Let me show you what can happen. So I'm going to cut this board about all the way through. So what can happen is, I'm going to use these 2 little pieces as an example, and then I'll lift it up so you can see it. So let's say this represents how bowed my board is. When I'm just about through the cut, what happens to that joint? Can you see what's happening?
Pinches.
It pinches. And what does it pinch on?
The blade.
The blade. So it's going to pinch on the blade. It's going to go whoop, like this and go flying up through the air. So if we do have a situation where this is really bowed, what we'll do is we've got a clamp and I'll show it to you if you need it. It goes right in here, and it holds the board down, so it can't go and fly up through the air. That's one of the reasons that happens more often with the sliding saw. That's why this one is not here any longer. I saw it on 2 occasions, the board fly up and hit the lights because students did not have it clamped down or held down nicely. Since we moved to having a simpler saw here, we've never had that problem once, and it's been 2.5 years since we made that change. Number 10, the teeth on the saw blade must face away from the saw operator. Face away from the saw operator. Now, somebody always says, it's a circular blade. They're always pointing in different directions. That's true. I'm talking where the cut is actually being made. So where the saw meets the board, the teeth face away from the saw operator. Number 11, clean off the saw before placing your material on the saw to be cut. So we're going to have this thing called sawdust, and it's going to be all over here. So let's say we got sawdust on top of the miter saw. And I'm going to go try to make my cut, and I don't want to clean it off because I'm feeling lazy today. So I push my board up against the fence, but now is my board able to be tight with the fence?
No.
No, because there's sawdust in there. Now these little things add up to be big problems. If I don't have a 90 on here, when I go put my face frame together, I'm not going to have nice tight joints on a face frame. So we want to make sure that we have nice 90s. So we don't want it, we want to have our board nice and tight up to the metal fence on the table saw. On the miter saw. And then number 12, get help needed to hold long pieces. That you don't have to write anything in there. Now, demoing this. This is a pretty easy saw to use, and it's a pretty easy saw to use properly. Couple things we need to make sure that we do. Number 1, if we are using this, so let's say I need to cut a board to 19 inches. I'm going to grab this one right here. First thing, you're going to have to get used to using your right and your left hand to do both jobs. If I'm standing on the left side of the miter saw, I am going to have my left hand on the board and my right hand cutting. But what do you think could happen here? Should I be holding this side or this side? Take a guess. I should be holding this side because this side is pinched in by the guard or the stop. So if anything's going to go flying, it's going to be this. So I need to be here holding this board down when I make the cut. So I'll cut it like this. Let it stop, bring it up. Now I have a board that is 15 inches long. Okay? Now the very first rule when it comes to cutting on the miter saw is we always take off an inch or two. We're always going to take an inch or two off of our board because it's bad. It's ugly. You see, that's the ends are usually painted red like that from the lumber.